Can an iPad make you a more creative person? It may seem like a silly question, but it's one that I think is important to answer because of the way the iPad is marketed. And also because here in the West, we often restrict our view of creativity to a handful of artistic pursuits, and we forget just how creative you have to be to work in a so-called left-brain profession like computer engineering. And that's why I think the real question is whether an iPad can enable you to express that creativity more often. It's really easy to wander into iPadOS and expect it to behave like a giant iPhone or a scaled down MacBook. I made that mistake for far too long when I was just getting into iPads. But the more time you spend on an iPad, the more you realise that even each model has its own character and its own learning curve. If you start to play around with the touch controls, experiment with the iOS settings, and push the boat out to discover some new apps, you can really shake off that muscle memory that you've been building up from more traditional computing devices. And that can just unlock a sense of play that will make you more creative. It's a bit like learning anything. That honeymoon phase, you're going to be picking up tons of new skills that make you see the possibility in your new pursuit. As time, that might wane, and we will get into that a little bit later. But for now, I just want to focus on some of those apps that can really help unlock your creativity if you are new to the iPad. One of my favorite apps is Procreate. It's a digital art app that is used by professionals, but it's incredibly accessible for newcomers as well. If you're like me and you spent most of your days in school doodling instead of taking notes, something like Procreate is really great to get into. Procreate is a paid app, but honestly, it alone is worth getting an Apple Pencil for. And as I say, it's really easy to get into. You've got tons of brushes to choose from. It's really easy to select colours and learn how to use layers. And even if you just want to have a bit of a mindful drawing session where you're just doodling shapes, it's really a great way to unlock your sense of play. Of course, this can lead you into a bit of a rabbit hole where you want to get better at drawing and sketching, learn about the nuances of digital art, and maybe even produce some works of art yourself. And that's one great example of how the iPad can create an environment for you to unlock a creativity within yourself and go and discover something new. As I say, I'm not the biggest note taker, but I do find myself taking notes and marking up PDFs on my iPad. And maybe it's because the Apple Pencil encourages you to doodle and be a bit more expressive than maybe you were taught in school. Even if you're using the free Notes app or going for a more premium tier of an app like Notability or GoodNotes, I think you'll find that putting your pen down onto a screen and relearning that connection between your hand and the page can actually make you feel more creative and can help you express your thoughts a little bit better than just typing on a keyboard. One great example of something that's not restricted to people in those artistic professions and just absolutely anybody who wants to pick up a pen and write down their ideas to help illustrate something that's been bugging them. It really isn't all about the Apple Pencil though, and because the iPad is essentially just a big touch screen, it has an element of modularity about it that you might not find in a computer. You can use a keyboard case to turn it into more of a notebook. You could put it on a stand to use as more of a low-key desktop setup with the keyboard and mouse of your choice. And you can switch between portrait and landscape orientations to better suit the task at hand. Experimenting with your iPads in all of these different settings just breeds creativity, and that's why I encourage people to take their iPad out of the Magic Keyboard sometimes, maybe even not to use the Apple Pencil from time to time, just to reconnect with the device in a different way. And I think opening that up will just create a sense of creativity if you feel like you're getting a bit stale. But what if you're a different kind of creative, the kind of person who gets lost in spreadsheets or thousands of lines of code to solve a really complex problem? And what if you're a video editor? Because honestly, that's not brilliant on an iPad either. Eventually, you are going to run into roadblocks where the iPad makes you feel a lot less creative. First of all, there's still no access to pro apps like Final Cut Pro. So you can get a decent amount of work done as a video editor in LumaFusion. But even if you want to export that file to finish off in Final Cut, you're going to have to pay an extra fee just for that functionality. And stuff like that can really sting you if you were hoping to do a bit of video work on the side on your iPad. But that's next level problems because first of all, someone needs to fix spreadsheets on an iPad. The experience at the moment is just awful. One of the biggest issues for iPadOS is that the cursor snaps to the closest touch target rather than giving you a bit more precision like you would have a cursor on a computer. That means navigating spreadsheets is a nightmare. You can go into the settings and enable Safari to request a desktop version of websites, and that will help programs like Google Sheets perform a lot better on your iPad, but it's still not brilliant. It still feels really clunky to work within a cell rather than just on the surface level of a spreadsheet, and formatting is also incredibly tricky and a little bit of a pain. I couldn't imagine trying to build a really complex report on an iPad, and I definitely wouldn't want to touch anything that required macros, so it's definitely one to avoid if that is where you come up with your best ideas. We'll have to wait until Stage Manager comes out to see how the iPad performs with multitasking in iOS 16, but for now at least, it's not a brilliant experience if you need to reference a lot of different materials from different apps. Sure, splitting your screen into 2 different apps with slide over as an option can be great for some small, simple tasks like taking notes from an audiobook, but as soon as you want to do something that is a bit more in depth, it starts to hit limitations pretty quickly. And there's even just a learning curve for getting used to working in such an immersive app-first environment. I'd also just add battery life to that. Battery life on iPads isn't really that bad these days. You can get probably about 8 to 10 hours out of my iPad Pro, for example. But when you compare that to the new MacBook Airs that are coming out and are getting towards 20 hours of battery life, that's like 10 extra hours that you've got to actually produce stuff. So in terms of battery life, there's really no competition in what could make you more creative over a longer period of time. Where the iPad really redeems itself is in terms of sparking your creativity because it's such a brilliant media player. And to be honest, those lean back moments like watching movies, listening to music, browsing Pinterest, they're probably the real reasons that most people actually pick up an iPad in the first place. Just having one pane of glass with you that can switch between watching a movie, playing a video game, taking notes, and even producing a video in the space of one flight to the US, that can be incredibly liberating. And I think that that's one of the things that really sets the iPad apart in terms of making you more creative. But if you're anything like me, just the experience of using such a well-designed device is inspiration enough. I actually bet a lot of people who do buy an iPad for media consumption eventually get tempted into creating on apps like Procreate, and anything that introduces people to new hobbies is really good in my book. No single device is going to magically change your character and make you a more creative person, but the right device in the right hands can bring out that creativity inside. And for a lot of people, that device might be an iPad, but for many others, it definitely won't be. So before you do buy an iPad, it's worth asking, what kind of person are you? Where do you find your creativity? And will the iPad enable it or will it actually limit it? Either way, you might want to watch this video next. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in a bit.